All right, guys. So here is the quick video for your zebra mussel assignment, which will be due probably the middle of next week. So some of you have already done it, and that's good. You may just want to watch the video to make sure that you answered it correctly. I won't mark until after the due date. Okay, so zebra mussels, exotic species. So basically, what is that, and how does it impact an ecosystem? So an exotic species is something that gets introduced into an environment and it shouldn't normally be there. And so what ends up happening is it's sort of depending on what is introduced, it can have really big impacts on the food chains and the food webs that are in that area, but also it can have impacts as that sort of falls out on the rest of the environment or the ecosystem. So when zebra mussels were introduced into the Great Lakes, so you can see here that happened in the early 1990s, they kind of really expected things to go sideways really fast with that. And over time, they ended up seeing there were sort of good and bad things to the introduction of the zebra mussels. And this article kind of looks at both of those pieces. So sort of what was expected to happen and then what actually happened. So they expected all these really negative impacts, and they list a bunch of them as you read through. So talking about them blocking water intake pipes, talking about them choking hydroelectric plants. So there's a bunch of different things as you read through, and you have to identify the negatives and the positives. But there's also positive things that happened with the introduction of the zebra mussel, which wasn't entirely what was expected, but kind of makes it interesting anyways, if you were kind of to think about the Great Lakes in general. So let's have a look here down at the questions. I can't remember if I showed you guys this split screen thing before. I think I did in class. I'm going to show you again. Make sure you have to be signed into Chrome. So if you're on a Chromebook, you're going to automatically be signed in. If you are just using Chrome on a computer, you're going to have to make sure that you sign in. I think it's usually somewhere up here that you do that. So you should be able to get yourself actually signed in with your board account. Once you've done that, if you don't have the little split screen guy, go to the Chrome Web Store, type in split screen, and then this is the extension that you want to install. So it's going to say add to Chrome. So you're just going to add it to Chrome. Once you've done that, I think the first time you click on it, you have to hit I understand and a couple of things like that. So just walk through those pieces. Then once you've got it, if you open the zebra mussel assignment up twice, you could set it up with this so that you've got your nice split screen. Just make sure that the one that you want on the left is the one that you've highlighted out, and then the other one's sitting here on the right before you do it. So once you've got the split screen open, it's going to be way quicker for you to sort of identify some of the positives and some of the negatives as you go through, because you're going to have the reading and the questions side by side. So a quick, easy tip for finding your answers. So first thing that you're going to do is you're going to read through, you're going to find out some of the positives of the zebra mussels being introduced into the Great Lakes. And then you're going to do some of the negatives. You might find as you're reading, you get a positive, then a negative, a positive, then a negative. There's a whole bunch of them. You only need to put them in dot points, and you may even want to copy and paste them. Hence having this open on the other side makes it easier for you flipping back and forth. Okay, once you've done that, you are going to look up other invasive species to Ontario and the Great Lakes. So ones that are here or could potentially be here. So if you just do a Google search on invasive species to Ontario, you should be able to find a bunch of different ones that are going to come up. And I just want you to list a few examples of those over here. So different invasive species. So basically they shouldn't be living in Ontario, but they are now. And they're spreading out through food chains and food webs and having potentially good impacts or not. But for right now, you're just going to identify some. So how have human activities contributed to the introduction of so many invasive species in Ontario and the Great Lakes? So if you have a look at some of these species, have a look at how they actually got introduced into our ecosystem. So if you look here for the zebra mussels, it tells you how they were actually introduced. Into the Great Lakes. So find out how a few others, maybe one or two, have been introduced into the Great Lakes. And it's just kind of interesting to see the human activities that lead to this happening. Okay, so invasive species and native species. You need to understand these two terms. So invasive means it's something that doesn't normally belong in the ecosystem and it's been introduced in. And what it might do is when we talk about food chains and food webs, it might displace something that would normally be in the food chain or the food web by adding competition into the mix. So native species are species that would typically be found in that ecosystem. So they haven't been introduced from some other country or come in off a boat or been shipped over in packages. Or sometimes when you're looking up invasive species, biologists will actually introduce them into an area thinking that they're going to control one population instead of another or to help out in some way. And it doesn't always work out the way that they planned. Cane toads in Australia are a really good example of that one. They're kind of one of those typical ones that we use as an example. So cane toads were an invasive species that were brought into Australia, and they actually have very few predators once they've been introduced there. So if you don't have a lot of predators, you're not going to die very easily. So you can end up with sort of these explosions of populations of invasive species in an area, or you might have an explosion of this population, which will eat a whole bunch of its prey. And then how does that impact the ecosystem? So you can have a look at what these two terms mean and how they interact. It varies really. So how the environment, the economy, and human society being affected by invasive species. So you should be able to do a quick Google search on that one as well. And then number 3, imagine you were given the opportunity to speak to the Ministry of Natural Resources about an issue of invasive or exotic species. Which human activities would you recommend should be discontinued in the Great Lakes to reduce the introduction of non-native species? So what could we do in the Great Lakes to stop introducing new species into the Great Lakes? So you maybe could look that up or just kind of take some time to think about how we're introducing things to the Great Lakes. And your answers up here should give you some ideas for that one as well. Excuse me, sorry. So alternatively, you may propose potential solutions to reduce the introduction of invasive organisms to the Great Lakes. So basically, you want to think about how can you limit invasive species being brought into the Great Lakes. So you're going to list a few of those here for me there. Okay, so reach out to me if you have questions. This one will require a little bit more of you searching on the web for some of those terms and identifying some other species in Ontario via searching the web as well. And I think I'll probably make this one due next Wednesday is my thinking. So I'll get the video up for you guys today, and you'll have until next Wednesday.